Hello everybody, it's Mike Levin. Wednesday, September 23rd, around 7:30 p.m. Out walking Cecil. You can probably barely see him in this light. And after one of my recent posts about the Samsung Note 5, someone posted the comment, "Oh my God, you're not getting involved in the holy wars of iOS versus Android, am I?" And well, hell yes. I've been on Android for about 2 years now, long enough in fact that it wasn't worth me being on this pay it down over 3 year or something program, but it costs you very little for the phone and you get to upgrade it every year. So I didn't upgrade my Note 3 for 2 full years, so that plan was a mistake, but I got to know Android well enough that I wanted to keep it for 2 years, which is really big for me considering I am very much an iOS fanboy. I have been involved in Holy Wars before. I am Mike Levin of the Commodore shareholder movement of the early 90s, the shareholders who tried to band together to try and tell Commodore what to do so that they could change the world with the Amiga computer. Because as a confirmed Amiga freak, there were a few things I knew, and one was that the Amiga was the one true computer. And while yes, it did happen to crash a lot, it had no memory protection, and it did flicker a lot. Its high res was interlaced on NTSC, which equates to a lot of flicker. In modern terms, it's the 1080i high res monitors or HD TVs versus the 1080p. P means persistent. It doesn't draw the screen in 2 sweeps and rely on the first to be fading by the time the second comes around to keep a bright picture, which is how NTSC worked. And the Amiga played directly into that to the point of using one of the frequencies, I believe, of NTSC for one of their internal clock chips, which made it very easy to superimpose graphics over top of video. And you did need one more device called a Genlock, but a Genlock on an Amiga only cost $150 versus thousands on any other computer because of that whole synchronization issue. And as I walk and shoot this video on my Note 5 that I'm pretty excited about, I feel a lot of the legacy of the Amiga, as it is expressed in Android, but I also understand how it was expressed under iOS. 2 platforms which, whether acknowledgement would ever really occur or not, were tremendously influenced by the first true personal computer, the Amiga. The first computer to multitask, to let you cycle through multiple open apps, to start printing something in one app and downloading somewhere else, in bulletin board software at the time, because there was no internet to speak of. There was an internet, but it was really different than it is today. Hardly any websites. When you connected to the internet, it was to transfer files and to do email, greatly through a text interface using something called terminals. And that's the kind of connection that people eventually stopped buying that type of connection. I mean, it was a thing there for a while where, you would get your internet as a PPP connection plus a shell connection. And the web, when it came along, became such a primary driver of the reason to be on the internet that the desire for this type-in text shell went away, and an internet service provider account would not necessarily assure you the ability to connect to the internet over over a shell connection with a login on a remote server as your sort of home and starting point. Well, anyway, not a lot of people took the Amiga computer seriously. Even though it was great for video, it crashed and flickered and disqualified itself in a lot of people's minds for business applications. And in hindsight, even though it made me furious at the time, in hindsight, rightfully so. A lot of business applications are mission critical, and the non-multitasking nature of the computers of the day was actually a benefit, because that would not be safe for mission critical applications until both memory management and the closely related virtual memory features came along. Because to keep large applications running, you need to be able to page things in and out of active memory. And to keep them stable, you have to not crash ever, like at all. Business environments were very unforgiving with downtime. So, a resource allocated is a resource relied upon. And those types of people, not so Amiga friendly. And I've become more part of that world, I guess, of late, designing things that I understand have to stay running, or else, people are going to go, what's going on here? So, using tricks to sort of get out ahead of the technology curve is what the Amiga did. Sure, you could have 4096 colors on screen at the same time, but the resolution was this block, brick pixels, literally the aspect ratio of bricks. And if you went to 16 colors, you could get more square pixels, 640 by 480. But then you went from a non-interlaced graphics mode to an interlaced one, and the screen started flickering. So 16 color flickering was a familiar graphics mode to a lot of Amiga people. So there's all this stuff about the Amiga that made it the model for what I feel is modern computers and mobile, and the phone that I'm holding in my hand right now. And the Android platform may be a little more so than the iOS platform because of the spirit of camaraderie and code sharing. Open source, free and open source software is very big on the Amiga platform. I used something called ARP, the Amiga DOS replacement package. It's very similar to like what I do today, swapping BusyBox out for GNU in Linux, and using smaller, more efficient, more embeddable versions of things to keep my apps lightweight and working well, assuming that I'm going to be starved for resources, a feeling that early Amiga users were very familiar with, which got really, really frustrating as PCs pulled out ahead. And then when those NVIDIA-style graphics cards hit, well, then forget it. Gaming on the PC just immediately became superior to gaming on the Amiga, despite all the bells and whistles that developers like Psygnosis, that later got wrapped into, like, I believe Sony, and is like a big player in the game space now, and another name, got their start. Electronic Arts was there at that time, and the Amiga was just the dream machine. And a lot of people were drawn to it, a lot of people hopped on board, and then a lot of people got disappointed because Commodore didn't hold up their end of the deal and keep the platform viable for a long time. I don't know if they made it attractive enough to developers. I don't know if they upgraded the hardware rapidly enough to satisfy the now demanding and savvy user base that saw what was going on over in the PC world at the same time with, when True Color, when 16 million colors in high res, like a 640 by 480 resolution, became commonplace. It was achievable on the Amiga with some very expensive cards, and it was very flaky because you had to use hacked versions of the Amiga operating system to use these cards. And then it was an environment that was totally unlike the Amiga we knew and loved, where you could do like run these Euro hacks and tweak out the hardware, almost like hacking a video game directly. It became much more something like a PC or Unix or Lisp computer. And then Commodore's demise was pretty clear, and people were deciding where to move themselves technologically, and it was very dry times because Windows 3.1, very disappointing to people who were used to the Amiga. Similarly, Macs were barely color at the time, and when they went color, they were massively expensive and very video and animation unfriendly still. So you couldn't go to Windows, you couldn't go to Macs, and there wasn't really great alternatives. Atari was doing no better than the Amiga at this point, really, playing a Me Too game. Yeah, so there's tons of parallels between what happened there and what's happening today. The Holy Wars, I mean, there was no Holy War like the Amiga versus everyone else Holy War. And what Google has done with Android, ripping off iOS in every conceivable way, is impressive. And then just adding into it the willingness to go places that a tightly controlled proprietary iOS is unwilling to go. And sure, you can pull out ahead in terms of features and certain graphics capabilities and exclusives, like the pen on this Note 5 that I'm using. I can draw on the surface of the screen with a quality that I believe surpasses a Wacom tablet, because you're drawing right onto the surface. And so the Android world has an ability to do a bit of this kind of thing, where iOS is much more limited because it can only move ahead at the pace that Apple hardware allows it to move ahead. So, I was in that strange, oasis, lack of oasis place for many, many years. And as Linux started to come along, and different hardware platforms started to be recognized as significant and important, like namely the various ARM, platforms. When people realized that a full-fledged computer could be run with much, 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 much less overhead, than the $1,000 hot-running Intel chips that were being peddled at the time, and that user interfaces built around such hardware could be really awesome, like iOS showed the way. As soon as Apple showed the way, just like they did in 1984, but in whatever that was, 2006, 2007, with iPhone and iOS, and then Google promptly becomes the Windows 3.1 to iOS the way Windows was to the Macintosh. So Android is to iOS what Windows 3.1 was to the Mac in those early days. And we all know what happened, how that all played out. Cheap wins. Good enough becomes better every year. And refinements are layered upon refinements. And the underdog product, somewhere along the way, catches up and maybe even crosses over with a pioneering product. And it has the ability to, source components from any number of different vendors, so you have no single vendor reliance, and the software is free in a lot of cases. So when you combine all these things together, you start to get a compelling argument to switch over from, in the early days, it was Mac platform to the Windows platform. These days, it's iOS to Android. I really hate to say it, but I was there when iOS 6 revved to 7, and the skeuomorphism was sort of all erased out in favor of this kind of child-looking primary color IKEA design, which allegedly was copied from an Android-ish look. And certainly the look of notifications in iOS was very Android-like, and it got a little bit buggy. I think it was iPhone 5 at the time, started crashing a lot, and the screen was starting to feel small compared to all these big screens around me. So, you know, a friend of mine at 360i showed me, he's a tattoo artist, Isaac. He showed me how he used his stylus on his Note 2. And I was just blown away. I was like, oh my goodness. I really did not think an active stylus on a phone screen could be that good, but indeed it was. And I was a doodler, and I like to do the animated drawings, very much like you know, the Khan Academy style ones. I'm going to be getting back into those again. And I immediately was drawn to that platform. And it was KitKat OS at the time, and I didn't like it a lot. It was really clunky to me. So I experimented with the different launchers, and I found KK Launcher, and it was awesome. It let me tweak out the system exactly the way I wanted it to be. I got rid of a lot of the Samsung things, like the insistence on you having to use their flip pages or flip book or whatever that thing is that tries to make a newspaper out of your feeds or whatever every day. So KitKat Launcher was my entire experience after the first month or so on the Note 3. Now on the Note 5, I'm sticking with Lollipop because it actually is starting to feel like something that I would use as my primary choice over iOS potentially now. The crossover may be occurring. I haven't been on a recent version of iOS lately though either. I think I left off at 7. What are they up to, 8 now? And I really can't compare apples to apples until I'm on a modern iOS and a modern Android at the same time. Android I currently am, and can do that comparison. But it is absolutely fascinating. It is just like deja vu all over again after all those switches from Amiga to Mac to Windows to back to Mac. Is really crazy, a crazy ride. And a lot of reset buttons are pressed on you, the giant undo buttons of life, because a lot of experience just like lost. You can't use it. It's not applicable to future jobs. So I'll stop there because going any further leads into a whole other story, which is how I found my way to the platform I'm on today, and what I consider the platform I'm on today. This very generic, almost anti-Amiga conceptually platform. Something that you can just cobble together from common parts and it can be virtualized. It's not meant to have the graphics. I mean, it can have graphics. You can emulate a graphics card and do whatever you want. But it's only intended to have as necessary the text interface, and that's Linux. And I'm trying to make like a standard or a spec that can be modernized around modern stuff, but become sort of like a Noah's Ark for code to bring stuff that you do today to make it timelessly applicable, to make it always relevant. So that's kind of my technology mission right here, at least one of the sub-themes of that mission. That you'll be seeing playing out here in these YouTube videos as I add to them and do a variety of different types that I have in store. So thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.